Hi, welcome back to my channel. For those who don't know me, my name is Katharine, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about my December reading wrap-up. So I'm going to be explaining these in the order in which I read them. So the first book that I read in December was the last book in the Harry Potter series. It's the 7th book. It's called Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Purely based on the fact that I felt like it was really rushed. I would have given it a 5-star if I felt like J.K. Rowling slowed down the pacing a little bit of this book. I understand now why they made it part 1 and 2 of the movie, because she just packed so much information into this book that they had to make a part 1 and 2 for the movies. I felt like if she had made this book into 2 books, like a part 1 and a part 2 like they did with the movies, I feel like I would have given the book 5 stars. It's just a lot of information that was packed in here, and I know it's because it was like the finishing of the series where she really wanted to wrap up everything, so I understand that, but at the same time, I just felt like it could have been, spread out among 2 books instead of just packed into this one. And this is a chunker. Look how thick this is. It's legitimately a brick. It's one of the longest books I've ever read. It's almost 800 pages. And I really enjoyed this book though. Don't get me wrong. I know I just talked about it being rushed, or at least I felt like it was rushed. But at this point in the series, being the last book in the series, I felt really connected to the characters. I felt like I had a really hard grasp of what the plot was and I really felt very invested in the storyline. So it would have been a 5 stars if it wasn't so rushed and so packed together. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I was able to finish the Harry Potter series because it's taken me quite a few years to finish it. I was averaging about 2 books per year, so it took me about 3 years to get through this series. And I'm a slow reader in general, and with the Harry Potter series, the books individually being so long, as singular books, it took me a while to get through the series. But I'm glad I finished the series. I grew up watching the movies but never read them as a child. But now as an adult, I wanted to go back and read the series for the first time so that I could understand the movies, because I think I've mentioned this on this channel before, but I was always so confused by the movies because I feel like with the movies, for one, they don't put as much detail into movie adaptations of books in the first place. So the Harry Potter movies already left out a lot of information, and important information, may I add. And then also the information that they did put into the movies felt very hectic and chaotic and rushed. So I just felt as a child watching the movies that I didn't understand what was going on. So reading the books definitely helped me understand and comprehend the plot a lot more, and now I'm watching the movies and I'm that's why I didn't understand what was going on. But I do love the Harry Potter series. I have a dedicated shelf in my room to my Harry Potter books and Harry Potter memorabilia, and I just love the series so much, and there's so much appreciation that I have for the series. As a Christian, there's a lot of controversy with Harry Potter and if you should read the books and watch the movies, but I personally don't feel convicted over not reading the books, if that makes sense. I don't see a problem with reading the books, is what I'm trying to say. I personally think that the witchcraft and wizardry in this isn't dark, if that makes sense. It doesn't have demonic undertones. The most that they're doing is growing plants, or in a sense of good versus evil. There's a lot of Christian allegories in the Harry Potter series, good versus evil, the power of love, the power of friendship, valuing, just human beings in general. And there are, or I should say witches and wizards, but in in a normal sense of the word, like they're still like human beings. So like I definitely think that the Harry Potter series isn't something that should be so controversial. I mean, like it does deal with like witchcraft and wizardry because like Hogwarts, Harry Potter is going to a school for wizardry, but like it doesn't so much like focus on that like entirely. There's like a lot of other themes going on, and like I don't think the magic that they're using is very demonic or like dark. If you're talking about like a book surrounding like satanic rituals and stuff like that, then like no, I'm not gonna read that. Or like there's a lot of horror books that like deal with like demonic possession and stuff like that. I will definitely not read those types of books, but like this is a middle grade book. You know, children read this book. And like I don't think that J.K. Rowling would put anything demonic in here, even though it does surround witchcraft and wizardry. Like there isn't anything really like demonic going on here. I believe that it's just like a great book to read, and it teaches a lot of great lessons. And yeah, that's kind of my take on Harry Potter as a Christian, but I don't really feel convicted over reading this. So I really enjoyed this book. I'm glad I finished the series. Again, I gave it 4 stars. My hand hurts now after holding that for so long, but on to the next book. It's much thinner. Waiting for Christmas by Lynn Austen. I've heard a lot about Lynn Austen and her being a great Christian fiction author. This is the first book that I've read by her, and I was a little bit disappointed. I know it's a Christmas book, so maybe I should just read one of her normal, you know, Christian fiction books that isn't based around Christmas, because I feel like you'll see a theme in this, that like Christmas books aren't really my thing unless they're like extremely popular, like mainstream popular books like A Miracle on 34th Street, or if they're like a Christmas classic like A Christmas Carol. So I think I won't stop reading Christmas books in general, but like just not reading a lot of these like newer ones that are coming out, like the rom-com-y type fluffy ones. I know this isn't like rom-com-y, but like those types of books, or just like this one's like just kind of more of like a novella. It was like under 300 pages. I think it was like 250 pages. And it was cute. I gave it 3 stars. And essentially it's about this married couple who finds an orphan boy on their porch, and he basically asks them to have him stay with them and help him find his little sister that was separated from him, and also wait for his dad to come home for Christmas. So basically this little boy and girl's mom passes away, and they are both sent to different orphanages, even though during this time period, like in 1901, the kids were supposed to stay together. Like if they were siblings, they were often put in the same orphanage. That was kind of a weird thing that happened where they were separated, like the brother and sister. So they try to go after the sister. They also are trying to wait for the dad to come home. So one of the things, the reason why like they were put in the orphanage is because like the mother obviously passed away, and they didn't know about the dad. They kind of just came and got the kids. And then the dad was on a shipping vessel. He was tasked with like a cargo ship, like that was his job, and he was gone for like months at a time. So that's kind of the reasoning why they were in the orphanage in the first place. But it was a cute read. Like it was supposed to be based in 1901, and I personally just didn't feel like it felt very much like it was 1901. Like a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the things that were going on for the plot didn't necessarily feel like it was in 1901. A lot of it felt like it could have been in modern day times. Like there were like some talks of like the suffrage movement and then also like the orphanages and stuff. Apart from that, like it didn't really feel to me like it was 1901. A lot of the historical talk or like dialogue that was brought up in this book felt very forced. Like the author was like trying to remind you that this was taking place in 1901. And then also, like I mentioned before, Lynn Austin is a Christian fiction author. So there were some faith elements in this, like the main male character is the son of a pastor. So they ended up like going to church a few times in this book, and there was like some like scripture like sprinkled throughout the book, but like with even that, along with like the historical aspect, like the Christian aspect of this book also felt really forced. Like she was also trying to remind you that this, was a faith-based book. So like I don't normally like rate Christmas books more than like 4 stars. Like, and 4 stars is like really pushing it. Like 4 stars is like, I really, really liked this Christmas book. But like the reason why I bumped this down to a 3-star is because of the fact that like some of the aspects of this book seemed very forced. I was really looking forward to this because it was historical and it's Christian, and that's typically what I like to read as Christian historical books, but like this just didn't do it for me. Like it was cute and I'll recommend it to people if they're looking for like a very like feel good Christmas book, and it was very wholesome, like don't get me wrong. It was just like sort of forgettable. That's why I gave it 3 stars. Like it was just like average and like very mid for a Christmas book. Like I'm glad I read it, but like it was just like okay. And then the next 2 books that I read were actually DNFs. The one book that I DNF'd first was A Cruel Prince by Holly Black, and that I just was really looking forward to. Like when I first got introduced to like Book Talk, Bookstagram, BookTube back in like 2021, like it was introduced to me, but that was like when I was really following a lot of like mainstream book creators and watching a lot of book content, and that like Cruel Prince trilogy was like recommended like so many times to me, and it sounded kind of interesting. It's like a young adult like fantasy book about fairies, and I read like the first chapter and I was like, this is not for me. Literally, it's just this scene, like the first chapter is about this scene of like this 2 young girls' parents like getting brutally murdered by this fairy, and it gets into pretty graphic detail, and then they're like taken away to this like fairy kingdom, and I just like was not about that. Like I read Harry Potter, and Harry Potter's parents were murdered, but like they don't describe it in graphic detail like they did in The Cruel Prince, and this is supposed to be like a young adult book, so like why is it being described in that way in a young adult book? Like when it comes to like violence and like sexual content, I believe it should be kept to a minimum, like very bare minimum, if any at all, in young adult books. Like that's just my own belief and opinion, but like I don't even feel like it's a belief or opinion. It's just like fact. Like if it's geared towards like young readers, like in high school, why is like there like gruesome graphic violence and sexual content in books? But anyway, another problem I had with the book was like it switched from like first to third person, like just within like the prologue and the first chapter. Like why is it happening that many times? And it just was confusing to me, like the narration. So I ended up just DNFing it, and like I actually had the whole series on my shelf, so I unhauled the first, second, and third book in the Cruel Prince trilogy, and I just brought it to a free little library, or a little free library. I always get the terminology, like the words mixed up. But anyway, that was my first DNF of the month. And then the second DNF of this month was A Cat Who Came for Christmas by Cleveland Amory, I believe. And I was really looking forward to this book because my Nana actually gifted it to me when I was like in elementary school. But I've been obviously putting it off for decades at this point. I'm now 28, so it's literally been decades since my Nana gifted that to me. And she has since passed away, so I kind of wanted to read it this year in memory of her. And she was a big animal lover, and I have a cat, her name is Lucy, so I was like, perfect timing, like let me just read this book. And it was cute at the start, like the first like 2 or 3 chapters, because it's essentially about this guy who finds an abandoned cat, shivering out in the cold, and he basically takes the cat in to take care of it. And I thought this was going to be a cute book about like him taking care of the cat, and it does have some of those aspects, but then this guy would like go off on tangents about like the most minuscule things that he would see in the cat that he rescued. So for example, like he has to take the cat to the vet to get its shots and like make sure it's okay and if it's healthy and things like that, and like to get it neutered. Then like it has like literally 2 paragraphs of him like bringing it to the vet, but then he would like go off on this like historical tangent of like the history of like medical treatments for cats for like 20 pages. And I'm like, what the heck just came of that? Like, you're literally taking your cat to the vet, and then now you're talking about the medical history of cats and like the medical treatments of cats for the past, 2,000 years or 3,000 years. Like, I did not ask to read like a textbook. Like, if I wanted to read about like the medical treatment and the medical history of cats, I would literally pick up a textbook about it. Like, it felt like the guy was lecturing me, and I just was not about that. So I ended up DNFing it, because that was like not the only thing that he would go off on tangents about. There was like multiple times where he would go on tangents about like small minuscule things of like what was brought up in the book. So I ended up DNFing that as well. I just had to change the battery in my camera, so I apologize if the screen has shifted a little bit. I didn't mean for that to happen, but it happened. So I am back with the next read that I read in December, and that is The Holiday Swap by Maggie Knox. And I gave this book a 2 stars. I don't have the physical copy of this because I unhauled it. I usually try to unhaul books that are 3 stars and under. I do make some exceptions for 3 stars, but for the most part, if they're like 3 stars and under, I usually unhaul them. But this book was just like a very stereotypical like rom-com-y type holiday read, Christmas read, whatever you want to call it. It did have like some aspects of like Christmas, but for the majority of the book, it just felt like it was not taking place during the Christmas or holiday season. Like, unless it mentioned like it being close to Christmas, like the plot itself could have really happened during any other time of the year, if I'm being honest. Like, just like the book Waiting for Christmas by Lynn, unless like they like intentionally mentioned something about Christmas, like it didn't really feel like a Christmas or holiday read. It felt almost forced in a way. And I also just like thought that the plot itself was very immature. It is essentially about this couple of, not couple, it's about these 2 sisters, okay? And they are identical twins, okay? And they end up, one of them is like a very well-known TV baker, chef, whatever you want to call her, and the other is like a hometown baker working at their family bakery or bake shop, whatever you want to call that. And there's just some situations that happen where they switch places and they end up falling for guys, and when they're in like that switched position, and it's just like about them like falling in love with these guys who don't know that they are actually the other sister. And it's with both of them, it just felt like almost like this whole book was like a very like mediocre version of The Parent Trap. And I love The Parent Trap movie, but at least like those girls were like literally like children. Like, I understand that in the Parent Trap movie, with my favorite version is the one with Lindsay Lohan. I know there's like another version of the movie, but like I personally like the one with Lindsay Lohan, but that's besides the point. Like, at least in the Parent Trap movies, okay, they are children, so I kind of justify them, like, switching places and, like, kind of lying about, you know, who they are based on that they're children. And children sometimes make immature, stupid decisions. But these girls, these identical twins in The Holiday Swap by Maggie Knox, were full-fledged adults. They were like in their late 20s, I believe, and I'm in my late 20s. And for me to, you know, if I had an identical twin, which I don't, but if I had an identical twin, like, for me to, like, switch, first of all, switch with them in their life, first of all, that's, like, just weird. We're adults. Like, we're not children anymore. Like, if we were to switch places, like, I understand, like, maybe if we were in school and, like, we wanted to switch places to, like, take a test or whatever, or to, like, prank a teacher or something like that, but, like, you're not in elementary school or high school anymore. Like, you're 28 years old or 29 years old, you're in your late 20s, and you're still switching places like you're a child. Second of all, even after you switched and you start getting into these sticky situations where you're falling in love with a guy and you're lying to them, and they both have these, like, mindsets where they're like, I shouldn't be lying to them, but I should tell them, but I'm not going to tell them. It's like this, like, war in both of these sisters' minds of, like, telling them, wanting to tell them, but not telling them. That was just very immature to me. So that's why I gave it 2 stars. Like, I didn't give it 1 star because 1 stars are usually reserved for DNFs and or books that I just, like, absolutely hated and, like, do not recommend. Like, the reason why I gave it a 2 star is because I could see other people liking it. Like, that's the reason why I usually give 2 stars to books, because even though it wasn't for me, I could see other people liking it, if that makes sense. But let's get on to the last book that I read this month. And you guys, I don't know what type of drugs Francine Rivers puts into her books, but I loved this book. It's called Bridge to Haven by Francine Rivers, and I gave it 5 stars. I have never given a 5 stars an easier rating than this book. Well, no, I have. I have given easy 5 stars to other books too, but this was just such an easy 5-star rating. Like, with any 5-star rating, it's pretty easy because when I know it's a 5-star, it's a 5-star. Do you know what I mean? And Francine Rivers writes chunker books. This is a brick. This is, like, almost 500 pages. And I just absolutely loved this book. It's essentially about this girl. Her name is Abra. She's right here on the cover. And she is essentially left underneath a bridge when she is just a baby. Her mom, like, gives birth to her, like, under this bridge, like, in this town called Haven. And that's why it's called Bridge to Haven, because, like, literally she's born under a bridge in a town called Haven, okay? And it's also kind of like the saying that I was trying to think of, I had to go look at my phone, is called a double entendre. And I think that's what the word I was trying to search for, or the saying that I was trying to search for, think of for this book. So Bridge to Haven is, like, a literal bridge in the town called Haven, and then it also has, like, other meanings behind it based on the plot of this book. So Abra, like I was saying, is born underneath a bridge in Haven, California. It's a town in California. I don't think I mentioned that. And it's basically about her life and how she is found underneath this bridge in Haven, and the guy that finds her is the main pastor in this town at this church. And basically he raises her up until she's, like, 5 years old, and then the wife dies. And the pastor thinks that this young woman, Abra, or young girl named Abra, needs to grow up with a mom and a dad. So he ends up, you know, having this other family adopt her. And it's just about her life, like, not feeling like she belongs. And she ends up, like, running away and becoming a very famous Hollywood actress. And It is a Christian fiction book, and Francine Rivers is a Christian fiction author, so there was a lot of faith elements in this, and it is about Abra, the main female character in this book, kind of finding her way back to God and like really, discovering who she is in Christ. And even though this is a very long book, like I mentioned before, like Francine Rivers is known for writing long books, but she does it in such a way where you're reading the book and you're like, why is she describing certain things the way that she is? Like, why is this being drawn out? But then by the end of the book, you're like, oh my gosh, that's the reason why she wrote the way she did and like drew things out the way she did. Because by the end, she wraps it up so well that like it just all makes sense, and there's such a depth to the book that you didn't realize that is what Francine Rivers was trying to do with the book or the plot. And that's what makes her books just so amazing. Like, I have not really read a lot of books that, live up to Francine Rivers' writings and like in her books and stuff like that. So like she is by far one of my favorite authors of all time, and literally like not a lot of books compare to her books. Like the depth and the plot and faith described in these books is like none other. Like this had me crying at the end of this book, and I just am so grateful that I read this book. Like this is a book that's like not very popular by her, but I am glad that I read this. Is like on her backlist of what I wanted to read. And a lot of people like in the Christian community have some like divisive thoughts on Francine Rivers, because she does, first of all, like have very long books, but like the longness, I don't even know if that's a word for it, but like basically like the reason why her books are so long is because of the fact that she is doing it for the plot. Like by the end of the books, like I mentioned, like you understand why the book is so long, because she was trying to provide like context and depth to the story, and like it makes it that much more real and raw for the story to, encapsulate what it is. And she writes a lot of deep books. She mentions a lot of hard things in this, and I think that's another reason why a lot of Christians have a hard time understanding why people like her books. She writes a lot of like things about, domestic violence, sexual assault, and she even mentions like sex scenes in here. And although like a lot of people say like, well, especially in the Christian community, like they don't think that like sex should be mentioned in books, or that like people are having sex in books and having like clean books in Christian fiction. But like for me, like there's a difference between like having sex mentioned in a book for the plot, and then also on the other hand, there's authors who mention sex in books just for lust purposes. Does that make sense? Like there's two different ways that you could go about writing sex in books. One, like I just mentioned, is for lust type enjoyment. It's almost like corn, if you get my drift. And then the other version is the way that Francine does it, and that is like just for the plot. And she doesn't mention sex or like sex scenes in graphic detail. She mentions it like in passing that they did it, and like how the characters are feeling in that moment, but then like she moves on. Do you know what I mean? Like it is purely for the plot, and you see why it's for the plot, and then she moves on. And that's what I appreciate about these books by Francine Rivers, is because even though she does mention like sex and stuff, I do think that she does it in such a way that it is still honorable for Christians to read it. All of her books, though, I should say, are 18 plus. Like if you're in high school and stuff, I don't recommend reading her books, but like if you're out of high school and you're in college, or you're out of high school just in general, like I recommend her books because they are heavier subjects. But at the same time, like, I don't know why it's taboo for Christians to talk about sex. Like, it's a natural thing that God created and created us for us to enjoy, like, of course, within the confines of marriage. But I also think that when it's mentioned in books or movies, like, it's if it's done in such a way where it's just for the plot of the book and it's not to have lustful thoughts or, you know, just in the book for lustful pleasures, I think it's okay to have sex in books if it's just for the plot and not for lustful reasons. And Francine Rivers just does such a great job of that. Again, this is called Bridge to Haven by Francine Rivers, and I give it 5 stars. So those are all the books that I read in the month of December, or at least tried to read. There's 2 DNFs and then 4 books that I actually read. But thank you so much for watching today's video. Remember to do all of the YouTube things that you know how to do, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!